Okay, everyone. A few things to start. Good to be here. The date. What are we? The
December 1st, that's what they said.
Yes,
It's
11th of Kislev. Yes, December 1st, 2025. I pulled up. We had a discussion a couple weeks ago. I didn't get to it. Chaim Soloveitchik, his essay "Rupture and Reconstruction." It was relevant to what we were doing, and I sort of remembered exactly the words, but I'll just read it to you. I mean, he's talking about how now we're in a more scientific era, and he says. The perception of God as a daily natural force is no longer present to a significant degree in any sector of modern Jewry, even the most religious. And then he says he would suggest that individual divine providence, though passionately believed as a theological principle, is no longer experienced as a simple reality. And then he ends that the long essay that having lost the touch of his presence, people now seek the solace in the pressure of his yoke, and that's basically one of the themes of his famous article. If you haven't read it, you can now get it in book form, Littman Library, together with a couple responses to the essay and his responses to the responses. Joseph, I think, wanted me to share that a couple of weeks ago he said that Ravar and Lichtenstein said that Kavod Habrios, abrogating halacha, only applies to other people's honor, not your own. And he says he was misremembering. Rivaro doesn't say that. But what he was remembering is this essay of Rivaro on the human and social factor in halacha is actually cited in both responsa from the conservative movement dealing with homosexuality, both the lenient responsum of Danny Nevins and etc., and the strict responsum of Rabbi Joel Roth. In fact, the so-called lenient side doesn't cite Rav Aaron Lichtenstein in support of their ruling, but they simply cite the article which calls attention to the importance of the human factor in deciding Jewish law. Joel Roth, in his reply, says that it's of course obvious that Rav Aaron Lichtenstein wouldn't agree with any of this, but they weren't really citing him to support any ruling. I last class we dealt with this the Birkas Oreach, and I spoke a little too quickly. I was holding the siddur, two Sephardic Siddurim, and I said that they don't have the Birkas Oreach really, and two people mentioned this to me, Eitan and someone else, that they do have it. So I looked again. They don't have exactly. Unlike us, which only says Harachaman, like Harachaman, Huivrachas Balabai says that. This is the version in the Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch, and what the two Sephardic Siddurim I have, the Ish Matzliach, the Od Yosef Chai, famous Siddurim today, they don't have the words Yehi Ratzon, but after that, basically they have pretty much all the words of it. I'm looking at it here. Yeah, other than the Hiratzon, they have Harachaman, but they do have all the words. Why they changed Hiratzon and Harachaman, I don't know. We in the Ashkenazic world don't have it. I mentioned already that the Tosas Yom Tov wonders about this. But it's not just Tosam Yom Tov. Lots of people do. The Yaakov Emden, he also wonders, how is it? I don't know the answer to this. How is it that we replace the Hiratzon, the text of which is given in the Gemara, with a Harachaman? Harachaman, Hirachas, Balabais Zeh, called Masumin Khan, whatever you want to say. I don't have the answer to that. Two more things. A few of you, oh, three more things. So remember we saw that Rev Shlomo Fisher said that the genealogy that you have at the end of the Book of Ruth and also in Chronicles, it can't be exact because there's the generations are too long. So when it gives, let's say, the genealogy of David, it's not exact. I quoted Rev Shlomo Fisher, who says that this was the tradition. He calls it the Masorah, but believe it took. That's what Roshel Bnei Adam is, that they're recording the genealogy, but this is just what people thought, and that's what Dibra, Nach, I guess would say, Kalashon Bnei Adam is. Rabbi Mazuz, I think Joseph Sasson, one of our sponsors, for pointing this out. I had forgotten about it. I went back to the his commentary on the Megillah, where it says, right at the beginning, chapter 2, it gives Mordechai ben Yair ben Shimi ben Kish, Ishemini. So you have Mordechai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimi, the son of Kish. Um, and Rabbi Mazuz points out that from the days of Kish, the father of Shaul, until Mordechai, you're talking 500 years. Uh, I mean, it's funny. I'm just thinking about this now. Why do we have to assume? I guess we know that Saul is from he's a Benjamite, and we know he's from the his father was Kish. But do we always have to assume that this is the same Kish? Uh, I don't know. Does the name Shimmy? I should have looked into this before. But uh, I mean, there's Shimmy Ben Gera, um, who's the nephew, I think, of Shaul. But I don't understand. I don't. That's what he's Mazusa. I don't. The truth of the matter is, Shaul Mordechai. He's saying here, Mordechai is not from the Zerah of Shaul. So I don't know. But let's assume for a minute here that this is the same Kish, because it doesn't really matter one or the point I'm bringing really does is not relevant to the historical accuracy of this. It's just that Mazuz feels it's okay to say, according to those who say it's the same Kish, that it doesn't mean Ben Kish, that Shimi is the son of Kish. What it means is a Mizera Kish. And he gives a proof of this. If you look in Bereshis, Chavtes, hey, um, it talks about Lavan, the son of Nahor. Here, I'll show you the pasuk. Let me see here. Here, if you look at this is chapter 29, verse Hey. Um, it says, Vayomer Lahem Hayadatem es Lavan ben Nahor. He said to them, do you know Lavan, the son of Nahor? And I mean, is Lavan the son of Nahor? No. Lavan's father is Betuel, and his father's Nahor. So here we see that in the Torah, even not just in Nach, they will skip generations, and Ben doesn't have to mean son. It can mean grandson. It can mean descendant. Important point. A number of you asked me what's going on with when I quoted the Dor Ravi. The Dor Ravi said, remember that if you're in a house and it's burning, you put on, let's say, women's clothing and go out. He doesn't only say that; he says that you even levishat shatnez, you would wear shatnez. Here, I'll read you his because being naked is the most embarrassing thing. So people said, what about this Gemara in Brachos 19b? Where it says one who discovers kilayim in his garment must remove them even in a public marketplace. So, and this would imply that sorry, the Rambam paskins this way as well. If you see kilayim that are forbidden by scriptural law, we spoke last class difference in scriptural and Rabbanan. You take it all. You should take it off someone else, and certainly you take it off yourself immediately. So does this contradict what the Dor Ravi says? The RV knows this. I think he must be understanding this Gemara. If you discover diverse kinds in your garment, you must remove them. It doesn't mean entirely. I mean, it means like you're in your underwear or something like that. That's clearly how he must understand it. And the Dor V discusses something else. Well, what about, let's say you're a Kohen and you wake up, let's say you sleep in the nude and you wake up and lo and behold, there's a dead body in your room. Now you might joke about this and say, "Well, this sounds like a joke," but it's in the Shulchan Aruch. Look at the Shulchan Aruch here in Yoreh De'ah 372. It's in the Ramah. A Kohen who lies undressed whilst in the same tent with a corpse and was not aware of this. So if the Kohen is sleeping, let's say, in a tent or a house, and he doesn't know that there's a corpse there. Someone died overnight. You don't inform him of it, but just say he should come outside. And therefore he'll leave and he'll dress himself. But if he knows, and the commentators explain the difference here, if he knows, or if they already told him, he's forbidden to remain there until he dresses himself. That is, he has to go out completely without any clothes on. Now, the Doravi cannot accept this. He says that this is, even though technically there's no Isser, perhaps it's the equivalent of an Isser Doraisa. And just so, well, in case the Doravi is a little too extreme for you, and you're worried about you Kohanim, what you'd have to do. I want to read you. If you look in the on the Pischei Tshuva on this spot, he quotes authorities who reject the Ramah and says that if the man was already if was inside the house and then the person died, he's already there beheter, so he doesn't have to leave. It's like Shevet Hase, he doesn't have to leave without getting dressed because of Kavod Brios and Shevet Hase. He's already there. And he cites the Noda Yehuda, who says, "Al kol panim mutar levosh hakatonis." That is, you can at least certainly put on some outer garment. It means you don't take your time looking for your fancy suit and get dressed and put your tie on, but you certainly don't need to go out naked. Um, and the last thing I want to show you, but the problem is, I'm going to tell you about it, but I don't know why I'm going to tell you about it because I forgot why it's here. Maybe someone will remind me. One of you texted me or emailed me, and I was going to read this, and I knew last class because I remember what I was going to say. That I was going to say something, and then we are going too long, so I didn't. But I'll read it to you, and maybe the person who emailed me or someone will remember. I'm not. It's very interesting what I'm going to tell you now, but I don't know how it's at all relevant to two classes ago. But maybe it'll come to me. If you look in, it's called Minhagim Kadosha Vermais, Worms. Great European city. We know many people uh, came from Worms. In fact, Rashi. I'm reading a lot about Rashi now in preparation for our summer trip, which will be advertised. I mean, the dates have already been advertised and the details soon enough. He comes all the way from France, where he's born, goes to study in Worms. And those who've been with us in Germany remember that. But this is the Minhagim. If you look on page 265, volume 1, by Rav Yosef Yuzpa Shamash, he's the Shamash of who wrote a sefer, all the Minhagim. Look what he says, that on Purim, the young men, whatever, he's talking about all the things the young men do, and then it says, then they go into the Beis HaKnesses Denashim. Beis HaKnesses Denashim does not mean a separate women's shul. That's just a way of saying the Ezras Nashim. At least in this case. In other places, it seems that it means a little more than that because it speaks about a woman chazan. But I think here it's clear it just means the Beis HaKnesses of the Ezras Nashim. And then it says, what do? Uva'in lamakom harabanit. They come to the Rebbetzin. You see how Rabbanit is already used hundreds of years ago, meaning Rebbetzin. Today we mean something else for many, as we saw. Who's the Rebbetzin? In case you're wondering, the Rabbanit, Eshes Hav Beistin, the wife of the Rav of the city. The Harabanit, or Rabbanis, if you want to say it, Manicha Yada al Rosh Kol Bachor Umavarcho. And the Rebbetzin places her hand on the head of every Bachor, every young man, and blesses them. And then it says afterwards, then the students, they leave the Beis HaKnesses, Denashim, and they go out. So I'm not sure what this was relevant to, but it is interesting that the Rebbetzin would place her hand, touching them, just like this, and would bless them. I remember why, because we're talking about Purim, all the things we are doing on Purim, which maybe violate halacha. The cross-dressing, the wearing the kilayim, and here, normally, we don't think, the Rebbetzin is going to touch the young students, young men, Nagia, all that, but that's what it says they did, and now, my friends, we return to our book. We're in chapter 7. We're going to finish chapter 7 now, speaking about And by the way, any of you who are in the Brooklyn area, they just asked me today, so I'm doing it. I'll send something out hopefully on the Surian blog. If you do live in the area, the night, December 13th in the evening, I will be in conversation, if that's the way they put it, with Erica Brown at the Kingsway Jewish Center. It's not just going to be about the book, because everyone, believe me, everyone who's been listening to these classes is in much greater detail than we'll be able to get to in the 45 minutes or so. But it'll be discussion about the book and all sorts of other matters, whatever Dr. Erica Brown wants to talk about. So that's Motzei Shabbos, December 13th at Kingsway Jewish Center in Flatbush. I want to pick up where I left off on page 137. The last thing I spoke about was Roy Jonathan Sachs's view of other religions. And I first want to say that, this idea of Rav Kook, that other religions could have had prophetic figures, on the face of it, it shouldn't be too regarded as too crazy, too radical. After all, don't we believe in Bilam? And there could have been other non-Jews who reached certain levels. So, on the one hand, it really shouldn't surprise us that maybe there would be prophets or individuals inspired by Ruach HaKodesh who were important in other religions, and yet we don't find it in our sources. We find Bilam, and maybe you can imagine there's other prophets, but the idea that there be any of the religions that exist that we have that would have this connection, we don't really have it. The only precedent for Rav Kook's position, and this is actually cited in the footnote to in Vuchei Ador, even though Rav Kook could not have known about this, because it only was published later, is Rav Netanel ben Fayumi of Yemen. The father, apparently, of Rav Yaakov Fayumi, the letter of Yemen is addressed to. He's not an important figure. He's not significant. He wrote an Arabic work, which is translated to Hebrew and English, in which he develops the idea that God sent different prophets to each nation of the world, which with legislation suited for each individual nation. This works very well with Rav Kook says, but it doesn't. It's not like Rav Kook was influenced or anything by it, but it's the only example of a figure other than Rav Kook who has this approach. Now, Rav Kook acknowledges that all these religions, which maybe had some sort of divinely inspired founder, they've all declined. They've adopted idolatry. They're in opposition to pure spirituality. But he holds out hope that in the future, um, because of the light of Israel. Where the people, the light of the Jewish people is not just going to influence Judaism, it's going to influence the entire world. All these religions will cleanse themselves of the dross and become pure again. So it's not a vision of conversion. Some people have this vision in the Messianic age of all the non-Jews converting to Judaism. No, it's not that at all. It's just that their religions will be purified, and for Rav Kook, other religions are natural. They're natural ways of spirituality. There's a problem in the Rambam, because the Rambam says a problem. When I say problem, I mean problem for people who want other religions to be able to service other nations. The Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim that the only option for non-Jews is the Noahide code, uh, or conversion. There isn't. He says non-Jews are not able to make their own religions. What does that mean? Not able. I mean they non-Jews can do what they want. But in this idea of like if Jews were in control of what the Noahide laws are, the Noahide laws themselves are theoretical in this sense, in that they're not being enforced. But on the assumption that they would be enforced, non-Jews would not be able to have their own religions. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, as I recall, he did not see really why the Rambam said this and what the source would be for this, and he thought that non-Jewish nations, of course, could develop their own rituals. So it's a difficult Rambam, but I don't believe that Rambam has been accepted. But that's what the Rambam says. Rav Kook goes even further. He says that people should have pride in their religions, and just like we have pride in our family, and they should observe their own religions. Everyone should be attached, because every true religion, by which I mean true, I mean a religion that inspires you to be a better person. That's really related to you grow up with it. It's part of your nature. It's part of your family, and we're not talking about theological truths here. We're talking about the the culture, the ethos that you can best develop in. Rav Kook even says, and this is where we see a radical position, that for some nations, idolatry is better for them than teaching them the Jewish idea of God. And he says, why? Because some nations are so low on the development scale, if you want to put it this way, that trying to teach them about a God who can't be seen, who exists somewhere, beyond our understanding, that will be the equivalent of atheism to them and will not help them. For some people, they're so this gets to the whole debate. What's better, atheism or idolatry? Some people think atheism's better because, after all, technically, you're not violating any prohibitions if you're an atheist. You don't have, there's no God, but you're not observing idolatry, which is a terrible sin. So better to be an atheist. But others, and you see Rav Kook here, he thinks at least he doesn't say it explicitly, but this is the implication. And there are others who say this, that idolatry is better because idolatry is one step above atheism because at least you believe in some divine power. And Rav Kook sees idolatry as at least giving them a basic morality that it might not be a universal morality, but at least in their own community, it's a morality. No idolatrous system said don't murder the outsider, but at least it says don't murder your own fellow idolaters. So for some people, this is the best they can have, and that's how Rav Kook explains the development of Jesus as a god. He says that the pagans, in what we might call what I call the pre-God capital G stage, they could only relate to divinity in terms of physicality. So therefore, they attributed divinity to this individual, Jesus of Nazareth, who Rav Kook says wanted to help many people and was successful in some things. In other words, what you get from Rav Kook is that Jesus did very good things and he was attractive to people. And rather than just recognizing this, because they were of the mindset that the highest level of achievement means that you're literally a god, even as an individual, they attributed divinity to him. And because they were so aligned with paganism, they saw an exceptional person, someone who had exceptional characteristics. Let's put it this way. We're going to see for Rav Kook that Jesus then destroys his he destroys his great characteristics and goes in the wrong direction. But he had certain special qualities, and due to that, his followers, because they were so influenced by paganism, they turned him into a god. And later, when they advance beyond this, they'll recognize that no human is a god, that's a form of idolatry. And the fact that so many, Rav Kook says, the fact that so many today, speaking in his day, continue to see a human being as divine shows that although there have been advances in many areas, when it comes to theology, much of the world is not ready to advance beyond the idolatrous stage. That's where Rav Kook says. Now, this is as tolerant an approach, a view of Christianity as you'll find in Rav Kook. I mean, when it comes to Christianity and Jesus, there's a lot of negative comments, and he even says that idolatry is on a higher level than Christianity because Christianity has totally removed the physical from the spiritual, trying to separate them. At least idolatry kept the physical together with the spiritual. So Rav Kook is, I guess you would say, negatively um, inclined against Christianity, even maybe in an unfair way. But living in Eastern Europe, that's the religion he knows, and it's a visceral disgust with it. He says that when he would, as a youth, when he would pass the church, even though it was had beautiful gardens, it was very nice. He felt as if it was the stench of an outhouse. I mean, he had this visceral negative reaction to it. And I have examples of this. So in this passage, which I just read to you, when he speaks about Jesus as, at least before he went the wrong way, he had all these, wonderful characteristics, and that's why people were attracted to him. That's as positive as you can get. I mentioned the last class, the other point that and then Mechi, we discussed it at the end of the class. He, he says that since the non-Jews have turned Jesus into an idol, therefore we can't say anything positive about him. There could be positive things you could say about him, but he said he compares it to if a non-Jew makes an idol of gold. It's gold. It's could be very beautiful, but since it's an idol, you can't say anything positive about it. If they melt down the gold, and then you can admire the gold and say, "Oh, it's very nice gold." But as long as it's being used as form of forbidden worship, then you can't say anything positive about it. He says the same thing about Jesus. As long as he is an idol, is a god, then we cannot we have to complete rejection of that. But one day, if they stop viewing him this way, then we can examine. Maybe some things he said are good, some things we don't accept. That's an important point, though, because look, Rav Kook says that even in the deepest idolatry, you will find holiness. It's all there, but it's been distorted. It's even maybe become demonic, but you can find it there if you search. And people like Rav Kook were able to point out how even at the base of idolatry, there are some holy sparks. Okay, he points out some other matters dealing with. He says, for instance, paganism is one reason why it's on a higher level than, let's say, Christianity is, or even in one particular way, even in Islam, is that unlike Judaism, the other monotheistic religions encourage a hatred of the other, and they've conquered territories and they've forced people to convert to their religions. But pagans, they believe in all religions. They don't, we worship a lot of gods, so you worship another god. Big deal. They don't seek to enforce conformity. To which now many of you are probably thinking, what about when the Bnei Israel entered the land of Israel? Weren't they obligated to enforce one religion and to get rid of idolatry? I think where Cook would reply here, and this relates to all the things we've said about his relatively tolerant view to idolatry, is that the land of Israel is special. Outside the land of Israel, he's very tolerant about the idolaters who are not ready to advance beyond that, and not only tolerant, but for where they are, this is the best thing for them. The land of Israel, though, is a holy land. And that explains why there can't be any idolatry in the land of Israel, not because of the individuals, but because of the land itself. With that said, however, let me point out that he was asked about the destruction of the inhabitants of the land of Israel by his student Moshe Zaidel, and because it's obviously morally problematic for moderns. And Rav Kook says that the elimination of idolatry is in keeping with Israel's general mission, and that refers, of course, to the land of Israel. We're not concerned outside. But he says, nevertheless, in all these sorts of cases, the matter is handed to the Beis Din, which would mean the equivalent of a Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin, listen to this, has to examine the matzav hamusar, the moral state of the particular idolatry. What Rav Kook is doing here is saying he's opening up a new avenue. He's saying that although in theory idolatry has to be banned from the land of Israel, and even people who worship it are not allowed to dwell there in the land of Israel. The ones who were killed, it's because they didn't leave. Everyone was given a choice, to leave. But Rav Kook says that the court could look at it and it could determine that, for these people, even in the land of Israel, this form of worship that they have is the best possible for them. And therefore, we don't need to uproot that idolatry right at the present. That is, I guess, the most liberal approach you'll get to what many people have an issue with. You know, what should be done with idolatry in the land of Israel after the 1967 war? The Satmar Rebbe said that since Israel has not destroyed all the churches in the land of Israel, then that shows it's not a Jewish state, which, of course, with all respect to the Satmar Rebbe, I don't have to say it, but the great rabbi said, first of all, this makes no sense. Second of all, what, you're going to start World War III here? But even leaving this aside, Rav Kook says that all these areas, the Sanhedrin could decide that at this point in time, this is a proper religion for these people. And, we're not going to move, obviously, you're not going to move them beyond this by destroying it or anything like that. So Again, everything is given to the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin, to decide. Um, Finally, or almost finally, Rev Cook says, I find this interesting as well, that you have people who all they want to do is talk about the negative aspect of other religions. He says that, and show that they have absolutely no value. He says that this is often done by the masses. And he says that well, all they do is speak of foolishness, and all they're false. They have no benefit. But Rav Kook says that this is a big problem because you're only one step removed from that to also finding fault with Judaism. Had these people been taught to appreciate the value and wisdom of other religions, maybe they would also have shown more respect to Judaism. He's talking about people who threw off Torah Judaism. And he thinks that they had been taught in their East European environment that every other religion is foolish and nonsensical. And therefore, it was only a short step from that to also saying, hey, Judaism's not much different than these other religions, just another superstition. So Rav Kook sees it as dangerous to have this sort of attitude. Uh, ah, because beginning on page 148, I discussed another fascinating matter that because Rav Kook sees some value in the other religions to their adherents, even idolaters, he says this explains why we can't teach Torah to non-Jews. And because some people are simply not ready for Torah. I know this might sound blasphemous, but at the end of the day, some people are not ready for it, and it'll lead them in a worse situation, and therefore we don't teach them. And when it comes to conversion, Rav Kook also says that we don't want people to convert because most people are not going to be in a better place. Though those people who do convert are special people. But we don't believe in converting everyone. That's not what that we're not a missionary religion. And it's not just that we're not a missionary religion per se, but for many people, what are they going to do? They're going to convert, but they're not ready to be good Jews. They're going to be eating tarfus. They're going to be doing all these things. That's not a help for us, and it's not a help for them. And this ties in very well, I think, with Rav Kook's idea of shituf. Rav Kook accepts the idea of shituf that even though he has very negative comments about Christianity, from a halachic standpoint, he believes that Christianity is an acceptable religion for non-Jews. And therefore, it makes sense if a Christian, he's speaking about Christians, that society comes, they want to convert, and we push them away. How can we push them away? I mean, if they're idolaters, don't we want to bring them close to get rid of the idolatry? But the answer is, even from a pure halachic standpoint, not speaking theologically, if they're not Jewish, then Christianity is not considered avodah zarah for them. So we don't need to immediately bring them in. It's okay; they're not violating avodah zarah in there, so we can push them aside, and that makes sense. Then the passage in Micha there of good quotes that every nation should follow their God. It's not referring to let's say necessarily pagan religions, but religions that are followers, let's say, of Shituf. That's one way to understand it. Um, okay, okay. Then the last section is one final section in this chapter in which I deal with additional perspectives on Jesus. Do I need to say anything? No, I think I'll just mention one point because we've spoken a lot about Jesus and how he views him. He sees him as someone who had great gifts, but unfortunately used them in the wrong way. Um, what I want to mention, however, is something not Rav Kook doesn't say this, but it relates to what he said before. Remember, we saw that he said that the the founders of these religions that come out of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam has to be referring to Jesus, the founder, might have even done wonders. Um, I make an argument here, which I don't know if that people are going to accept it, but the argument is as follows. Maybe you've heard it before. We have a book called Toldos Yeshu. Goes back to the Talmudic period, which has all these wonders that Jesus did. And they explain these wonders that Jesus stole the Shem HaMephorish, the holy name of God. and therefore he was able to do all sorts of miraculous things. He could fly and all these miracles, turn water into wine, you name it. He could do it. And there's a whole version of how the Jews were able to stop him. So the question is, why would Jews write such a work? Did they believe that Jesus did these miracles, even the resurrection? I mean, what's going on here? Why not just like we would say? Of course, we don't believe this. My argument is as follows: that Jews assumed he did these wonders. Why did they assume he did these wonders? Because millions of people, almost like a Kuzari type of argument in reverse. It shows you the danger of this argument. But all these people claim to have seen him. The New Testament describes him performing these miracles in front of thousands and thousands of people. So I think there was an assumption that with such vast numbers claiming to have seen these things, or reports of these vast numbers, there it must be true. Okay, so I think from our standpoint, we know that this is nonsensical. It doesn't have to be true. But in the medieval period and before that, people assumed, I'm claiming, that it must be true since so many people had seen it. Now, how do we know so many people had seen it? It's just reported in certain sources they did. So it's not, but you can use the same sort of argument that who would lie to their children about these things, the same things you hear in the discovery seminars of sort of seminars. Okay, so we assume then Jesus did these things. Well, obviously, since he wasn't on God's good side, how could he have done this? It must have been through magic, black magic. And what type of magic could have done these things? Well, we don't really believe in black magic, but if he got the hold of the Shema Meforish, because the tradition is that if you have God's holy name, then you can do all these things. So you have the strange situation here where Jews from the Talmudic period through the medieval period and even beyond believe believe the miracle stories told in the New Testament, but the only reason is not because he could do miracles like from the good side, because he was a holy person. No, that somehow he had tapped into Kabbalistic secrets. He had the Shema Mephorash. And this explains, we have examples, and subsequent to the book, I found more examples. In medieval times, Jews believed that saints did miracles, Christian saints, and it was forbidden for them to go to them, Christian saints, but they believed it. Why did they believe it? Because all these Christians were going and being healed and all these things. Jews just thought that these wonders were happening through, let's say, use of magic or of the dark side. The point is that this explains why Jews would believe things we never in a million years would believe. But Rav Kook says there's no problem in believing this. I'm not going to believe it. But from a theological standpoint, there's no problem in believing that he says that earlier figures from other religions could do this, to which I add, and we know that Jews did believe it. The only difference is that Rav Kook is saying that God would give them the power to do this, and the Jews were believing in the medieval period and before that he got it from the Shem Forest. But I quoted in an amazing thing from Rav Aryeh Kaplan. Rav Aryeh Kaplan of blessed memory was asked in 1966 by B'nai B'rith, Adult Jewish Education. They sent this letter out to a number of people, and he was at that time a young rabbi and starting to make waves. A very impressive individual. He died much too young. And he was asked when he was 32 years old about how Jews should relate to the idea of non-Jewish prophets and claims of wonders. And Rav Aryeh Kaplan said that, first of all, he said that the way we should portray it is that Christianity serves God's purpose in the world. That's what the Rambam says. But then he says, we can even regard the miracles ascribed to Jesus to be true without undermining our own faith, since his message was not to the Jews at all. Now, I am certain Aryeh Kaplan did not believe that Jesus did any miracles, but he's saying we can if we wish to. In other words, we don't need to argue against it. We can acknowledge that they could be true. But this has nothing to do with us because um, Jesus was not sent to us. He was sent. He's adopting Rav Yaakov Emden's approach, basically, that Jesus was a prophet to the other nations. Uh, and I think Rabbi Kaplan is saying this only he wants to present a progressive view for B'nai B'rith. You know, in the yeshiva circles, Rabbi Kaplan has said something very different. But the point is basically that this isn't our concern. We have our Torah, we have our truth. If God chooses to be with other people, miracles, that's fine. It doesn't affect us. The only problem, I think, with what Ravari Kaplan says is that the idea that, to say it about Jesus, I mean, he is a negative figure in our tradition. Um, Rav Kook, even Rav Kook's comments talk about right at the beginning, I think, before Jesus moves in a bad direction. But that's all I wanted. I mean, look, there's a lot more to say, but you can read about it in the book. The very fact that we're discussing, Jesus of Nazareth and dealing with Torah matters is itself shows you that we're on unfamiliar ground here, because this isn't the sort of thing that great rabbis normally discuss. But Rav Kook, as we know, his ideas are much broader than normally thought, and he had to make sense of this. He had to take this into account. So the next chapter, chapter 8, I deal with two things. I call it halachic change and secular knowledge, just because uh, it wasn't big enough to put two separate chapters. If I were to write it now, I have some more material, which for whatever reason I just neglected to include about secular studies. Rav Kook's yeshiva in Yafo. I'll get to it when we do a secular studies. But let's speak about halachic change. We've spoken a good deal about it in theory, but now let me speak a little bit more because there's some other points I want to share with you. We spoke about how Rav Kook, it's not just Rav Kook. I mean, this is the Gemara, this is the Rambam, that a Sanhedrin has the authority through creating drashot to change the law. Um, if it's a drasha, then the Sanhedrin does not have to be greater than the previous Sanhedrin. If it's just a gezerah, then in order to change it, it says the Rambam says you need to be greater. The Sanhedrin that wants to change it needs to be greater than the previous Sanhedrin. But there is another opinion in the Rishonim that says even a lesser Sanhedrin could abolish a decree of an earlier Sanhedrin if the lesser Sanhedrin feels that the circumstances for which the decree was made by the earlier Sanhedrin is no longer applicable. Then a later Sanhedrin, even if it's not as great as the previous Sanhedrin, could still abolish it, because really what the Sanhedrin is saying is that we're not abolishing it. We're telling you that if the previous Sanhedrin that instituted it was still here, they would abolish it. The Rambam apparently doesn't agree with this approach, but this is also found in other Rishonim. But Rav Kook, he goes more. He says more than that. He says that uh, we've spoken already about how the future Sanhedrin will understand how Halacha and society interacts in a way which is different. So we don't need to review this. But uh, he says, though, this is what I want to get to, because I don't want to repeat what we've seen already. That First of all, he says when he speaks about Sanhedrin, he's not only referring to the Messianic era. He has an early essay in which it's clear that he's talking about even before the Messianic era, we could have a Sanhedrin. And he has a debate or correspondence with the Rabbi Shmuel Alexandrov. There was a rabbi, a big Talmud Chacham, but he became a big radical. He lived in the city of Babroisk. He didn't work as a Rav, but he published many Sfarim. But he seemingly thought that we're reaching the stage today when we can abolish certain Jewish laws, that we're in a new era and we have the authority. And Rav Kook thinks that he's a reckless thinker. He wants to push the end of days before we're ready for it. That is, Rav Kook is adamant that there are no changes in halacha until the end of days, or until we have a Sanhedrin that can do that. Uh, but he says that the Sanhedrin doesn't. You don't even need to trouble yourself, he says, with getting rid of Gezerot, because you say, well, the Sanhedrin today is not as great as the previous Sanhedrin, because Rav Kook has another approach to this. He says, listen to this. Uh, he says that the authority of the Talmud and its acceptance of the Jewish people uh, was only designed to be binding when we were in a Golos framework. However, when we return to the land of Israel to create a new Jewish people, the Talmud was never intended to be binding. So a new Sanhedrin could have passed all sorts of laws, and it's not a problem with overriding earlier laws because the earlier laws were never intended for this sort of period. Remember, when all Torah Shabbat Peh, when it's codified, the Jews are not in control. Others are in control. So that vision allows us to imagine all sorts of things that will change in the future. Now, even if you don't want to accept this and you want to go with the Rambam's language, that in order to abolish laws, you need to be greater than the previous Sanhedrin, that's not a problem for Rav Kook either, because the future Sanhedrin in the Messianic era, originally he thought you'd have a Sanhedrin before the Messianic era. Then he adopts a more conservative perspective. It'll be after the Messianic era. But that will be an era when prophecy will return. And although the Rambam does not think that prophecy has any role to play in deciding Jewish law, there are many who think differently. And Rav Kook thinks that prophecy, prophetic wisdom, let's call it that, is going to return, and therefore the judges, the Dayanim in the future Sanhedrin will be at a higher level than the previous eras. Um, In fact, he says that when a Sanhedrin, if they, through a new drasha, teach us a new way of understanding the law, that's not even abolishing it or uprooting it. That's simply a new understanding. And he gives certain examples, I'll give you an example of this. We're going to see a couple examples he gives, but here's an example of how a future Sanhedrin, following the Rambam and following Rav Kook says, could function. So we know that women are not accepted as witnesses in courts for a variety of matters. In some matters they are, but others they aren't. How do we know this? Well, there's a drasha. Now you can offer all sorts of reasons why that the women were generally confined to the home. They took care of the family. I mean, you can come up with all these reasons you want, but and these could be perhaps in the background. But at the end of the day, the Gemara derives it from a drasha. They read a pasuk a certain way. Well, this is like Hilchos Sanhedrin, 1:1. It's actually in Hilchos Mamrin, where the Rambam says if a later Sanhedrin can make a drasha reading the pasuk differently than the earlier one, it doesn't have to be greater. This Sanhedrin doesn't even have to be greater than the previous Sanhedrin. And they could do that. So a Sanhedrin in our day, if we would have a Sanhedrin, they could give a different drasha and they could read it differently and say that yes, women can be witnesses. These through the hermeneutical principles. You know, if you read Rav Kook's, much of what I'm talking about, and I'm going through it quickly, much of what I'm talking about comes from Livuchei Ador, chapter 13. I wrote that this could stand as its own essay and really should have been, I said it should be translated to English. We are fortunate it now is translated into English. In fact, I didn't pull this up. Let me show you. Hold on a second. Let's see here. I'm going to show you something because it's not yet on Amazon, but it is here. Hold on, let me share my screen with you. Anyone who wants to see, yep, this is going to be out by Hanukkah. Rabbi Aryeh Sklar, rabbi in one of the yeshivas, or more than one of the yeshivas in Israel, has translated For the Perplexed of the Generation and annotated. I can tell you it's an excellent annotation. He was very um, kind to me right when my book was done. When I couldn't make any real changes, I learned that he was translating it, and I asked him, he sent me various passages that he had translated, which I was able at the last minute to include in my book. It's ironic. My book appeared before his, even though he had been working on this for a long time, but I was able to use his translations. We differed sometimes about our translations, and we had very nice back and forth conversations about why I think one way, he thinks another way. But this is the classic work. It says in the description here. Rav Kook addresses issues such as biblical morality, atheism, determinism, evolution, archaeology, biblical criticism, the relationship between Torah and science. Rather than seeing these questions as threats, Rav Kook insists that the conflicts between Torah and modern knowledge can be reconciled through a deeper unity of the religious and secular realms. So I am looking forward to receiving my copy because he told me he's going to send me a copy. And anyone who wants to investigate it further can do so. Now, but this everything I just mentioned about Jewish law, Sanhedrin, that's part of chapter 13, and we're going to come back to this in a few minutes when I deal with sacrifices. Very important. But he has more to say. Rav Kook also deals with the curriculum. We saw earlier on some of the problems with a limited curriculum, but Rav Kook really waxes eloquent about how we don't want to close ourselves off from any knowledge. All knowledge is a gift given to us from God, and the secular studies are valuable. And the people who oppose secular studies, really, many of them really oppose even Torah study. He says that if you don't involve yourself in the wisdoms of the world, you diminish like God's image inside you. All these sort of things that he's sounding like a Turim Derech Eretz Hirschian type of Jew, which raises the question, obviously, why didn't Rav Kook institute any of this in his yeshiva? To which I have to say that I never mentioned that he had a yeshiva for a few years, maybe 5, 6 years in Yafo, where they actually did have secular studies, although it was for more of the elites, but he instituted that. But um, so we see at least he started with his vision, but when you think of his great yeshiva, Merkaz Arav, he never instituted it. How could he speak about how great secular studies is and how it gives us insight into the world if he never instituted this? And I think we have to conclude that he saw that there are bigger fish to fry, that with the return of the Jews to the land of Israel, you need to focus on Tanakh and Emunah. In other words, we need a broader curriculum, but except for certain specific, special people who he encouraged secular study to go into secular studies, his yeshiva remained Kulo Kodesh, completely Torah oriented, just with a wider perspective of what Torah is. I mean, the idea that you study Emunah, they call it Emunah, not Hashkafa, Emunah, or Tanakh, that's about as broad as you can go. Now, what we're going to do, well, actually, let me finish this chapter quickly, and then we'll just have one more chapter. Um, he speaks about secular studies. He says, interestingly, he says that in the past, it was Jewish society was able, Torah society was able to rise to great heights because they did not have secular studies, which is obviously true in Europe. But that's when we were in the Golos. We're sort of like in the desert. But now we're in Eretz Yisrael. We have to be complete Jews again. To be a complete Jew, you can't shut yourself off from secular studies. Rav Kook sees the ghetto as a positive thing. Unlike Hirsch, who thought that the ghetto was a negative thing, we don't want to be in it. From Rav Kook's perspective, when we were in the Golos, the ghetto was a good thing because we were able to reach heights of Torah greatness. But now that we're returning to Eretz Yisrael, the worst thing is to be in a ghetto. All of you listening know you can have a ghetto in Eretz Yisrael. There's plenty of them. You could take the ghetto from Warsaw or from Vilna, and you can bring it to Eretz Yisrael. I don't mean the ghetto like as in the Warsaw Ghetto World War II. I mean a ghetto where you shut out the outside world just to be focused on your small community. So obviously that now that we're re-entering history, coming to the land of Israel, we have to be complete people. We need secular studies and. So just another thing that's important in Rav Kook, which has nothing to do really per se with Zionism, although he thinks it's related, because he sees that this is the place for secular studies in the land of Israel. But I mean, if you take a step back, you can see that the way he describes it really applies in every society. It's, I mean, I think it's almost as if he's trying to justify how Jews lived in Eastern Europe because when he sees the Rambam and Rav Sadia and all them. He's so impressed by the greatness of their learning in non-Jewish spheres. At the beginning of Vinduchei Ador in chapter 2, I think it is, he says that in order to, and he wrote this when he was still in Chutz La'aretz, he says, in order to speak to the young generation today, we need to be just like the days of the Rambam and Rav Sadia Gaon. It's not just enough to have Torah study. We need to also have secular studies, because how can you relate to the young people and their challenges if you don't understand it? So when he speaks about how, we rose to high levels of Torah greatness and in the ghetto, that's correct. But um, I don't know. It's almost like a b'diavad. I think he because I don't. Otherwise, I don't know how to make the two jibe together. That on the one hand, you look to the Rambam and all the unless you're going to say that in all those years in Chutz La'aretz there were no challenges, which is maybe how we look at it. That is, in the 18th century in Vilna, there are no challenges, so you don't need to have the secular knowledge. But once you get to the 9th century, there are intellectual challenges. So then we have to return to broad knowledge. Maybe that's how he looks at it. But he does idolize the way Jews lived without secular studies for the time they were in the ghetto. But we're not supposed to be in the ghetto forever. I guess also in the Midbar, all you do in the desert before you enter the land of Israel is learn Torah. But you're not supposed to stay there permanently. It's only a temporary time. And then you're supposed to become a real person. So the last chapter of the book, which we'll get to next class, deals with animal sacrifices, although this is going to relate to some of the themes we've seen about how Jewish law can be changed. It's much more significant than that, which is why I thought it needed more pages, a separate chapter. Vegetarianism, and also the Messianic era, the Messianic king, I should say, and the state of Israel. You say the state of Israel. What does Rav Kook have to do with the state of Israel? Well, we'll see. Incidentally, Rav Kook refers to it as Medinat Israel. His students see this as a prophecy. He was a prophetic figure, because if you know the history, when the state of Israel was declared, they didn't know what they were going to call it. Some wanted to call it Yehudah, which was the name of Judea, which is the name of the last Jewish kingdom, which was destroyed by the Romans. But they picked Israel. That's the name they picked. Rav Kook refers to it as Medinat Israel. He dies in 1935. He talks about this future state, the state of Israel. So they see this as a prophetic figure. And I don't think we'll wrap up next class. I think we're the one after that. And you're in for a surprise, those who haven't read the book about Rav Kook and the state of Israel, perhaps, but we'll have to talk about that as well. So, our time is up. Let me take the comments here. Joseph says the Ramah holds you don't have to rip the Kalayim off the person if the person didn't know because of covenant bills. Yes. Well, that's the same, similar to the issue if you wake up, if a Kohen wakes up, he's naked and there's a dead person there. If he doesn't know, you don't need to tell him, and he could just get dressed and you just tell him to leave. Exactly. But I have to look at that again, what you say, Joseph, because the Gemara says the Rambam says otherwise. The Rambam says, I look at the Ramah. The Rambam says that if you see someone wearing kilayim, you that are forbidden by Torah, not by rabbinic law, that you take it off. And so send me the Ramah, because that and the Gemara we saw that's not referring to if they don't know. Although I understand what you're saying, it would make sense. But I'm looking at the Gemara right now that um, well, the Gemara says that one who discovers kilaim in his garment removes them in the marketplace. You don't wait till you come home. So you could read that, I guess, that it's if you find it, but if you find it in someone else, if he doesn't know, you don't have to. The problem is the lashon, the language of the Rambam is differently. The language of the Rambam is if you see a kilayim on your friends, even if the embarrassment it might cause. Yes, okay, I'm sorry, you're right. I'm looking right now just in the Rambam, and they quoted here that the Taz and the Ramah say only when he's conscious of the transgression. but not if it's unintentional. But the Rambam disagrees. So where does the Ramah get this? I think the Ramah probably gets this from the language. There's two ways to read the Gemara. The Gemara says if you realize that you're wearing kilayim, you take it off even though you're embarrassed. So the Rambam reads it as that you certainly do it for someone else as well. But the Ramah's reading it the same way he reads the case of the person waking up with the Kohen. Thank you. Gershon, you say was Jacob practicing interfaith when he sent messengers to Esav? Ramban suggests this interaction foreshadowed Jews' negative experience caused by Rome, meaning presumed Christianity. In a drasha sense, yes, if you want to darshan it, you can. But al pi pshat, there's nothing interfaith there. He's simply looking out for his safety and that of his family. Janine says, according to Rav Kook, how did Jesus use his gifts uh, the wrong way? Well, because Jesus did not accept the binding nature of Jewish law. And he didn't have, Rav Kook follows the tradition of the rabbis, that he didn't he followed the tradition of Chazal, that he didn't respect the rabbis and didn't follow everything they told him. And clearly he didn't, Rav Kook, of course, is accepting all the statements of the New Testament. He didn't accept all of Jewish law as binding. It's the famous stories. They pick his students pick the grains on Shabbos, and the Pharisees rebuke them. And he says the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Uh, it doesn't seem Rav Kook doesn't say anything about Jesus seeing himself as a God figure. That comes later, but he didn't follow Jewish law. Moved in the wrong direction. Yes, Daniel said in German the city is pronounced Worms, medieval Hebrew Vermisa. Yes. Janine says if we were to abolish the authority of the Talmud, Judaism would look completely different. Well, Ryaka Kamenetsky says that if you take away all the rabbinic laws about Hilchos Shabbos, just imagine it, like we could stand in our store and be selling things. I mean, it's um, our whole Judaism is obviously based on rabbinic law. So the way we practice it today is very different than it was practiced, let's say, in the first temple or even sometimes in the second temple. We're, when we say the authority that a Talmud is abolished, what this means is that not that everything is going to be gotten rid of, but we are not, the future Sanhedrin was not going to be bound to the authority of the Talmud. It will be able to determine perhaps that 99% of what we do today is valuable and worthwhile and will be kept. But they have the authority and they'll affirm it. But since the Talmud was only codified for a pre-Eretz Yisrael, pre-return to Eretz Yisrael life, when we are living as free people in a land, they will not be bound by it. They can affirm it, and presumably they will affirm. Why would they get rid of the rabbinic laws? That's what Shabbos means to us, the rabbinic laws. But there will be times that if they wish, they can change it, even if they're a lesser based in, which Rav Kook doesn't necessarily agree because he thinks they're going to have prophetic wisdom, because lechatchila the Talmud was not, the laws of the Talmud were not intended for all time. Because of why not? Well, why? Because the future Sanhedrin is going to Torah Shabbat Peh means that the Sanhedrin legislates, continuously legislates. That's the job. That's what Chazal were doing, and that's what we're going to turn to doing. So yes, it'll be very different than we are today. Okay, so I think Rabbi Kelman, Rabbi Jay, we have two more classes, I believe, unless we can finish up in one. Um, certainly before we come to the end, before we break, and then I also want to talk to you about the interesting class I want to do about Nachum Rabinovich. So we'll
Yeah.
figure out a time
We'll
on that.
we'll talk about that. Okay, very good. Okay, of course, I mean, you kind of alluded to it, but halachically, it's much easier for Sanhedrin to change like biblical law than rabbinic law. Like, you didn't get into that so much, but any Sanhedrin, everybody agrees. You don't need Gadol b'chokma b'minyan to reinterpret the law. And when you have a rabbinic law, the rabbis say, we know the law doesn't require it, but we're going to do it anyway. So for that, to overturn it, Okay, Rav Kook, whatever said, but that's much harder today, next to impossible at times.
Because
But
you need a Sanhedrin that's greater, unless you would have said,
no,
right?
but a biblical law, right? A biblical law, if you right, yeah, you listen
Yeah,
to the great.
biblical law, you just
You
it
don't
says a
need any
base him
Sanhedrin
that's
that's
lesser
greater.
can do it.
Forget you don't need any Sanhedrin can overturn any biblical law. If
Yeah.
they understand the Chumash that there are only 26 Avot Malachot, that's fine. It changes
Yes.
automatically,
That's what the
regardless of
Rambam
what's taken.
says.
We don't have a Sanhedrin today, but that Sanhedrin does not have to be Gadol
So here's a
B'Chacham.
question, though. When they were Rabbi Yehuda Leib Maimon was pushing for a Sanhedrin,
Yeah,
there was all this opposition to him. And the reason for the opposition was they said they're going to have a Sanhedrin and they're going to start updating Jewish law. And that's
right.
reform.
That's
So the
what.
question is, Rav Maimon says, why is that a reform? But why even from the opposition is that I think they thought it was a reform because they thought that Rabbi Maimon and the people he would pick would not be suitable judges. Because I think everyone
Listen, I
has
don't have
to
to do.
agree. If Ramosha Feinstein and the Satmar Rebbe and etc., they're all on the Sanhedrin, everyone would agree they can do it.
No, they would
The
not.
question is, who would? They were afraid that this Sanhedrin would change Jewish law, not
Chadash
because they
Minator,
would not
Mark,
be
Mark,
valid dayanim.
Mark. I don't have to tell you, as the great historian, that Chadash Minator rules the much of Orthodoxy today, and you can have 100 Moshe Feinsteins, and they reject a lot of Moshe
I
Feinstein.
understand, but I don't understand how you could say Chadash Torah when this is the law. Everyone has to
Chadash
agree that a
Minator trumps
Sanhedrin can
everything.
change it. By
Chadash
definition, you have
Minator
to.
trumps everything. By the way, you should know the first shir I ever heard from Rav Lichtenstein in the Chris Kolo many years ago. We learned Sanhedrin was on, and he mentioned Rav Maimon's book. He talked about the Chidusha Sanhedrin, what Eretz Yisrael, the definition of Eretz Yisrael, because Eretz Yisrael has different definitions, because you can only give smicha in the land of Israel, but that's not necessarily the same land of Israel as Truma and Maser. And he spoke about Rav Maimon's book, which I have at home. And I went there and I bought it. Yehuda Leib Maimon wrote a little 75-page pamphlet urging the rabbis to establish a Sanhedrin, but it went less. By the way, the brisker up with Heichel Shlomo and Techerem. I'm sure you know that.
Yes, yes,
It's
because it's all had to do with this. Yeah,
right. It's Jewish people are always nuts, but
yeah.
okay, what can we do? Okay.
But I think what I would just end with, I think everyone agrees in theory. They just differ who the dayanim would be. That you know, that there will be a Sanhedrin one day, and we don't know what the Sanhedrin is going to do because the Sanhedrin is going to. Rav Kook himself says that they'll make new chumras. There's
Listen,
I know a guy, I don't know if he listens to the class, is a very right-wing Hasidic fellow, but he said to me, when I asked him about a Sanhedrin once, what do they think in his community? He said that would be the worst thing. So I said, why? I thought he was going to say, I thought he was going to say like, because they'll be too liberal. This he said no. He goes because look who the Gedolim are today. If they were on the Sanhedrin, they'd make all sorts of very stringent rules, which we wouldn't like. That's what he said.
listen. On one of our trips last year to Spain, you spoke about Rav Yaakov Beirav and how
Yeah,
heated that argument was in the 16th century when they tried to
yeah,
reestablish a Sanhedrin. That was bitter, bitter debate.
yeah.
Anyways, okay.
Okay.
We look forward to next week. I hope I'm glad people are listening. The attempts to reestablish the Sanhedrin have not worked. The two major attempts, right? 16th century and then in
It's a
1940.
messianic hope.
Right, right. But it would change. It would, Janine, you're 100% right. It would totally change Jewish life, which is why people are afraid of it. Because, you know, I mean, it's everybody said that you're rid of Yontif Sheni, but Mark and I both like Yontif Sheni, so we don't want this Sanhedrin to get rid of it. But anyways, okay, everybody. Laila Tov, tomorrow morning, Dr. Sokolov on Piyut on the Parsha, and Rabbi Shulman on Sefer Yeshua at 1 p.m. And okay, invite a friend. We'll send out the Hanukkah schedule pretty soon, the next day or so. But the Yomi will be Sunday, December 14th, from 9:15 in the morning till about 2:15 in the afternoon. Please God, 7 speakers back to back, 40 minutes each. Okay, everybody, be well. Lila Tov, all the best. Bye bye.